Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's panel, the organizers and the outline of today's panel. So first of all, I want to stress how exciting it is to see all these people attending from everywhere around the globe, not only Utrecht, but like Europe and worldwide. So welcome and thank you for joining. So we will be recording. So if you are in the audience, if you will be so kind to turn off your camera and mic, and this will help us not only with the recording, but also with the bandwidth. And it will make sure that everyone that's discussing during today's panel is clearly visible. Right. So before we start, I want to briefly introduce Embodied AI, this initiative that we are working on since the beginning, or like last year, September last year. So Embodied AI started by me, Maartje de Graaf, and Zeren Jumak, all working at Utrecht University. And our goal was really to unite researchers locally, so first at Utrecht University and then internationally, working in the field of embodied AI. So not only do we want to unite researchers, we also want to increase visibility, build community, and foster these interdisciplinary collaborations, as well encourage more diversity and inclusions of different perspectives, not only from computer science, HCI, but also psychology and other social sciences backgrounds. So far we have organized 3 panels, and we're about to embark on this upcoming talk series, seminar series that will start mid-October. So Geertje just built a new website, which you can access, and we will post updated regularly with all the talks and all the video clips that we recorded throughout the year. And we're really catering for everyone, so not only senior researchers, but also students, early career researchers, and even industry partners. And Embodied AI is an initiative supported by Human-Centered AI, which is the focus area here at Utrecht University, in connection with the 2 special interest groups on autonomous intelligent systems and socio-cognitive modeling. And from September this year, we're supported by Geertje Hendricks, who is also here today, who's a student assistant in Embodied AI. Right. So let's get on with today's panel. So today we will be talking about the international landscape of embodied agents. What can we learn? How can we foster international collaborations across disciplines? And today we're joined by Dr. Astrid Weiss from Vienna in Austria, Professor Tony Belpaime, who has a joint appointment at Ghent University in Belgium and Plymouth University in the UK. And also joined by Elisabeth André, who is coming from the University of Augsburg in Germany. And finally, we're joined by Marianne Foster, who joins us from the University of Glasgow in Bonnie, Scotland. And so today's panel is organized by myself, Ruud Dentjes, Zeren Jumak, who's also here, and Maartje de Graaf and Geertje Hendricks. So if you have any questions, hopefully the chat will be enabled for every participant at the moment. You can submit your questions to the panel on Mentimeter, which will be explained in a moment, or in the Teams chat. Right, so the schedule for today is first, we'll start by introducing the panelists. So every panelist has prepared some slides, including the organizers as well. Then we will start with the panel discussion, the formal panel discussion, which will take about an hour or so. And then after that, we will stop recording and we will have an informal discussion with the audience where you can ask your questions. And then we hope to be done 4:30. Right, so with that being said, I want to ask Tony to introduce his line of research and his perspective in a couple of minutes.
I'll keep it brief. So hello, I'm Tony, and so my main base really is at Ghent University in Belgium, and I still have a visiting position in Plymouth in the United Kingdom. And to kind of put my cards on the table, I'm not a psychologist, cognitive scientist. I'm an engineer and a computer scientist, and I kind of, a long time ago, started to wander into different fields. Something I enjoy a lot, just colouring outside the lines. And about 12 years ago, I started to work into HRI, and it was a bit of a coincidence. Some money came my way where we had to look at how robots could be used to help children in hospital. I was doing a minor bit there on grounding of linguistic interaction, and then before I knew it, I suddenly was absolutely kind of in love with the field of HRI. For many different reasons. I think it is the ultimate interdisciplinary field, but also it's a very kind field with really nice people. So I kind of just stuck. And so what do I do? It's a whole range of things. On the one hand, we've got applications, and I've got two pictures there, one of a robot being used in education, so where we use the robot to kind of take over roles of a teacher. And then under that, robots used in psychotherapy, and specifically we've done some work on autism spectrum disorders and how robots can help there. I often work together with psychologists, and we kind of tease apart how people respond to robots. So that's the top right picture, where we then look at presenting robots in different ways and letting robots behave in different ways, and then see how people just respond to that. So very much behavioral psychology, which I'm totally not trained to do at all. But so that's why I work together with these people who are, I know much more about running experiments and analyzing data. And perhaps in recent years, I've more and more become, fascinated by how we can get rid of the Wizard of Oz. So how can we boot out teleoperation of social robots? Because half of the published research is still using a teleoperated version or semi-teleoperated version of a robot. And that just doesn't do. We're in this field to study how people interact with robots. And of course, the assumption here is that robots should be autonomous. But what should the AI look like that kind of powers this autonomy in social robots? And I think it's one of the most fascinating problems. And so in recent years, we've been focusing more and more on that aspect. And I'll hand over to someone else now.
Right. Thank you so much. So next introduction is by Astrid.
Sorry, it took me some time to figure out where to unmute. Hi, everyone. My name is Astrid. And what I'm in relation to embodied AI interested in is the question, what makes people accept or reject companion robots? And I know Martje was also very much into this question. So it's very unfortunate that she cannot be here today, because I followed up a bit on her research with a recent study. So next slide, please. I agree with everything Tony said about the HRI community, as I'm also working a lot in that field. But I originally studied sociology and did my PhD in human-computer interaction. And I have it on the slide because it fits this panel. So I was half a year as a postdoc also in the Netherlands with Vanessa and worked with Vanessa Evers. And right now I'm at TU Wien, and it's a bit similar. I'm switching departments because of different interests in different questions. So I started at TU Wien at the electrical engineering department, where the people are who actually built the robots, and now moved to the Faculty of Informatics in a group that is focusing a lot on qualitative research in human-computer interaction. And my personal fascination, why I stick with the topic of human-robot interaction is the type of problems that we have to solve. And I think one of the biggest ones is finding the use case, is finding reasons what robots and social robots can do for us in a meaningful way, in a sustainable way. And I'm doing HRI research now for almost 15 years, and I have the feeling we all are repeating ourselves with the ideas what robots can do for us. And that is also related to the fact that we still stuck a lot with Wizard of Oz. So yeah, next slide, please. So two of my recent projects used commercially available platforms. One's the Vector robot and one's the Cubo One robot. And these you can really consider just as embodiments for some kind of intelligence. And obviously, it's all linked to the use case when it comes to long-term acceptance of these robots. So for the Vector robot, we did a 7-month household study also during the pandemic, which it started before then we had the shutdown. So that was interesting because people were really stuck at home with the robot and it didn't increase any interaction with the robot. And the Cubo One was the idea to make it, let's say, easy to personalize for people to set up what the robot should actually do for them. And in both projects, it still turned out that it is really tricky to find these use cases and to create them in a way that is intuitive for people, meaningful for people, and yeah, makes them use the robots for long run. And I presented results of this vector study recently at Roman and had brilliant discussions with fellow researchers why we are still not there yet when it comes to companion robots that we really have in our homes. And there were various opinions, and I'm looking forward to discuss them later. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, so next up is Elizabeth.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a professor of computer science at Augsburg University and a founding chair of the lab for human-centered artificial intelligence. And our research lies at the cross-border of HCI and artificial intelligence. And my main area of research at the moment is social signal processing and effective computing. So we analyze human behaviors in order to enable artificial agents, virtual agents, but also robots to respond to humans in a natural manner. I already started to work on virtual agents in the early 90s. At that time, the topic was a little bit unusual and strange. So there was actually a panel on drama and personality and user interface design at the CHI conference. And they introduced the topic with the words of all the things that come to mind when one thinks of computers and user interfaces, drama and personality are among the last. And so it's nice for me to see that nowadays nobody questions, at least not everybody questions, that computers could have a personality. And if you give them human-like features, they should have a personality, because otherwise they would show some kind of inconsistent behavior. And I found that very interesting and fascinating over all the years to develop applications for virtual agents and robots for a large range of applications. So you see here some of them on the slides. So in a European project, we developed a healthcare agent called Christina. And the agent actually served as a mediator between people in need of care, relatives and caretakers, and was supposed to bridge not only language barriers. So in Germany, we have a lot of caretakers from other countries, for example, Poland. And we also have people with not coming from Germany in need of care. So for example, coming from Turkey, and they are not only language barriers, but also cultural barriers to bridge. And we developed this agent. We also developed a number of agents for social coaching. So an agent provides a good opportunity to engage in role play with human users. So you see here an example where a young lady is actually engaged in a job interview with a virtual agent, and to prepare, of course, for a real job interview. We developed also agents that serve as a coaching assistant for psychological support. And recently in a national project, we developed together with a company called Novel Robotics, robots with social resonance. And you can see here the robot that was designed and also built by the company Novel Robotics. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And then last but not least for the panel is Mary Ellen.
Yeah, hi. So I can kind of echo a lot of the things. This is almost redundant based on what Tony, especially Tony and Astrid, already said about their trajectory into HRI and their feelings about the state of the field. The way I got into this is actually from a computational linguistics background. So I'm interested in linguistic communication. And what my research these days is mostly about is trying to analyze human social conversation and try to come up with some way of doing some analog of that with embodied conversational agents, especially physically embodied conversational agents. So next slide. Yeah. So if you think about social conversation, when humans talk to each other, it's not just about exchanging logical forms or just exchanging strings of text. It's a whole multimodal package that involves your voice and your facial expressions and your gestures, like what I'm currently doing. All these things are sort of a big communicative package that people produce and other people understand. Next slide. And so the general sort of thrust of the research that I'm trying to work on is to try to model some level of that sort of natural of embodied communication, but to implement it on where one of the partners is not a human, but is in fact an embodied robot. And that involves a lot of the things, especially that Elizabeth just talked about, things to do with social signal processing. So you need to understand the social signals being produced by the human partner. You need to produce appropriate social signals from the robot in response. This has to happen in real time and ideally autonomously. So I think next slide. I can't remember what I put in the next slide. This is my last slide. I don't have pictures of my robots, and I realize now I should have put pictures of the robots from my projects. But what I have done in this space is the most recent project that I've done that completed on this was taking Pepper Robot, the one you can see here, and it was a European project where we had the goal of deploying that in the real world in a shopping mall. It ended up being a 14-week long deployment, about average of about 3 days a week, about 3 to 5 hours a day of Pepper in the wild in a shopping mall, having people interact with it. And that brought up again the point that especially Astrid brought up about use cases, was it kind of felt like the robot was there, but it didn't really have an organic reason to be there. So the interactions people had with it were kind of fake in some sense. It wasn't, there wasn't really demand for the robot to really be there. The project I'm working on right now is one where I hope we'll have a use case that's a bit more organic. We're collaborating with some partners in Canada, trying to develop a social an autonomous social robot that can help children deal with painful or distressing events in a healthcare setting. So in a pediatric emergency department, the state of the art in that space is to basically distract the child when things are being done, like getting blood taken. And there has been some work on using social robots in that space, but it's mostly been, as Tony pointed out, teleoperated. And what we want to try to do is add some level of autonomy and responsiveness to that, and evaluate it eventually, hopefully in a couple of years, through an actual medical grade clinical trial, because we're working with medical researchers in Canada on that. So that's obviously not going to involve language because it's children in the real world in a stress situation. So obviously language is not going to happen there so much, but I'm hoping that'll be a bit more of an organic use case for trying to deploy a robot into that space. So, but that's kind of my perspective on this.
All right, thank you so much. So that was the panel with their perspective. So I guess in a few minutes, we as organizers would like to take the opportunity to present our perspective. And first up is Zarem.
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm Zerrin Yumak from the Information and Computing Sciences Department at Utrecht University in the Human-Centered Computing Group. I'm one of the organizers of this event. Yeah, my research line is very similar to what was told so far, actually. I really realize it's very close. So I'm working also on autonomous and interactive social behavior models for both virtual humans, in particular 3D characters, and also human-like robots. My background is computer science, so my main focus is on algorithms and how to develop things like engineering, but with a lot of interest in the social sciences and human parts. So that's because we started really to collaborate closely with Ruud and Marce in the last couple of years. Yes, my focus is on algorithm development and perception of social behavior. So I see this continuous interaction between virtual humans, robots, their anthropometric properties, interactions with people, and then algorithms. And what is really interesting is this interdisciplinary aspect of this area that fascinates me, because the theories are coming from social sciences, humanities, arts, physics, biomechanics even. There's quite a big range of topics. And even in the computer science, there are different communities that touches these topics, which is a kind of a nice thing, but also very challenging at the same time. And of course, there is this human-computer interaction aspects, which also touches different communities, such as intelligent virtual agents, HRI, even VR, such as IEEE VR community. So the main challenge here is to develop virtual humans, robots. One needs the whole computer science department. I find this very challenging since my early days of research, when I started first as a PhD student. Now I'm an assistant professor, but the challenge continues, and also this communication to other disciplines and other faculties. I'm working on so far 3 lines of research. The first one is personalization and long-term social interaction. So the main goal here was to analyze, can we develop algorithms that can help people engage with robots or virtual characters in the long term? So here on the right, you can see an image that is from a user experiment where there was this realistic face from Hanson Robotics. It's a very, very realistic Android robot that was part of my PhD studies. And the goal was to model emotions, personality, and memory, and their interactions with each other to increase social presence and task engagement in multiple interactions. So that was a fully fledged system that can recognize people through the camera and respond accordingly based on different personality types, and also remembering past exchanges with the people. The second research line I'm interested in is the situated interactions. So the question here is, can we develop robots that can interact with people, not only 2-party settings, but when there's a group of people, which is of course necessary in more populated environments, such as airports, schools, etc. And here I was working on models for engagement modeling and turn taking for group interactions and multi-part interactions. So here you see in the image, it's at the entrance of our computer science building. We had this character, Sarah, that was interacting with people, taking the role of a virtual receptionist, and that can manage this turn taking and engagement and natural interaction. And lately, last 4 or 5 years, I guess, I'm working more on the nonverbal motion synthesis, like social animation and nonverbal motion synthesis, because I was also originally coming from a graphics animation lab. So here the question is, can we automatically generate nonverbal behaviors mainly for 3D characters, but also for robots? So I'm working on automatic machine learning based methods to generate nonverbal behaviors like facial expressions, gestures, gaze, based on audio, text, and music input. So here you see some of the images that is coming from some of our recent research. It's a lot based on motion capture data to generate plausible animations and realistic behaviors for games and for virtual reality interactions. Okay, I think that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. So then I will briefly introduce my line of research and my perspective. So I was trained as a psychologist and a neuroscientist. So looking at human-robot interaction, I really look at the human side of the interaction, thereby trying to understand how distinct aspects of social cognition are affected by long-term interactions with a robot. So how can we actually map the changes in social cognition across time and space? So mainly I use these experiments where I invite people to come to the lab and then give them a small robot to interact with at home, and to do a pre and post testing phase, for example, by investigating brain activity and how brain activity changes over time once you start socializing with a small companion robot. And thereby looking at distinct aspects of social cognition, so empathy, emotion recognition, trust, but also intention understanding. So all these things that we really use to interact with other humans. So to what extent do we use similar processes to interact with robots? So really, I'm trying to answer this question, how real embodied interaction, as the previous speakers already said, like real interactions over longer time affect human social cognition. And then eventually trying to build to this more free flow and real world interactions that are outside of the lab and are not under my control as an experimenter. Thereby looking at human robot teams, robots in the wild, in the educational system, looking at joint decision making to really understand how psychological forces affect these collaborations between humans and robots. And eventually working towards robot to human behavioral transfer. So for example, robot nudging. So can we use a robot to help or nudge people into the right direction in terms of behavioral interventions? So that's my perspective as a neuroscientist, psychologist on human-robot interaction. Nicely aligning with the perspective of Maartje, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. And Maartje is an assistant professor at Utrecht University, also working on long-term interactions with robots. And then finally, we have Geertje Hendricks, who is a student assistant working with us on this Embodied AI initiative and helping us organizing all these great events. And we'll actually start with a short Mentimeter. So before we start the panel discussion, we want to hear anything, so we ask a couple of questions to the audience to understand where you're coming from and what perspective we actually can highlight during these discussions. So if you want to take over sharing the screen. So if you can just log in, and the panelists can also join, of course, the Mentimeter. Right. So I think people found their way into Mentimeter. So maybe we can start with the first question. Right, so first question is, we really want to hear your occupation. Like, are you a PhD student, a bachelor student? a full professor even? Do you come from industry? So I think we should have close to 20 answers. Right, there are some students, but there's a lot of assistant or associate or even full professors, and one person from industry. All right, do we want to ask the next question? All right, so where are you at the moment? So we're really using the benefits of this online format. Right, someone from South America. And of course, a lot of people from Europe. Some people from the Middle East. And I guess no one from
It's not working for me. It's not working for me. But if I click submit right now, it's going to show that I'm in Africa, but I'm not. So I'm not going to.
All right. So we know you're in Scotland at the moment. There's some people from the UK. All right. Let's move on to the next question. All right. So are you a psychologist, sociologist, computer scientist, or do you have another background? So quite some psychologists, computer scientists, people in AI, human-computer interaction, sociology, of course, and media studies. Well, nice, wide variety of, wide range of perspectives and backgrounds. All right, do we have one more question, Geertje? No, we don't. All right, so then we're going to start with the panel discussion. Right, so yeah. So the first question I want to ask, and this is a tough question. So why do we actually need AI with embodiment in the form of virtual agents or robots? So yeah, what is the true role or need for embodiment? Anyone want to take on this question?
I think I kind of said in my talk the communication is not just about transmitting like logical forms or strings of text or even like audio files. It's a whole package, and I wave my hands around a lot, and I do even more when I try to make this point, I realize. But if I'm trying to communicate this way, you know, I mean, you still don't need an embodied AI to understand me, but if you're talking to you want to talk to something that responds in like face-to-face conversation. If you want to have face-to-face conversation with something, it's going to have a body, because I think face-to-face conversation is much richer than any other form of communication. So it needs to be something you can talk to face-to-face.
Yeah, no, indeed. So I think a lot of you would agree. So who wants to respond to that? Or Tony?
I very much agree with what Marie-Ellen said, but there's some other reasons as well. It's also because our response to these embodied agents is so very different. You know, if I see a real lion or I see a video of a lion, I am going to respond in a very different way. It might be different if I see a toaster in real life and a picture of a toaster. So it's slightly exaggerating here, but certainly with an embodied system, you've got this, you know, this tangible, visceral experience. This thing is present in your, not only in your social environment, but also in your physical environment. So it can take physical actions and social actions, and we respond to that in a very unique way. You know, we take this intentional stance. We don't see a robot as just a collection of electronics and metal and plastic. It's something that is half alive for us, and that makes it entirely different. And it also, when you have embodied AI, you can't take shortcuts. So in, you know, on-screen characters or chatbots, you strip layers away and you simplify the problem of interaction. While with a robot, it's there, it's the full package, and it poses challenges that we need to meet as a community, and it forces you to be really honest about how hard this really is, creating this social interaction with robots. And of course, embodied AI is cool. That's perhaps the most important reason.
Well, I totally agree. Like, it's the coolest form of AI, of course. Elizabeth, you wanted to add something as well?
Yes. So for everyday users, embodied AI simply supports more natural forms of communication. And forms of communication we are used to from human-human communication. And if we communicate with artifacts that have some human-like features, it's somehow strange, you know, to adjust to something which is kind of human but not really human. It's like learning to speak a foreign language. And also when we interact in a group, so for example, imagine a robot as part of a mixed team consisting of humans and synthetic agents, such a robot still enables eye contact between the humans and also, of course, between the human and the robot. And now imagine if all members would just be looking at their mobile phones. So this kind of interpersonal communication would be very unnatural. So some people are concerned about embodiment and making robots behave like us. But I would even argue, if we take the other extreme, if we just have, let's say, mobile phones or screens, then we will develop communication forms that are not good. So I guess even because we have now these Zoom meetings, we may develop very strange forms of communication. I heard some students were afraid of or have developed some kind of social phobia to meet other teachers or companions, students in person. And I think that's why we need embodiment. We do not want to adjust to the behavior of artifacts that are not like us.
No, yeah. Astrid, you wanted to respond to this?
Yeah, I wanted to react to one of the aspects of the question. You were asking for the need. And the need, I think this is the one that is most questionable. What do we actually need it for? Because we heard all the comparisons. It might be different if I have it on screen or if I have it embodied in the real world and all these things. I agree with everything that was said so far. However, where it's also extremely helpful, and here I come to the need, is to learn about what makes humans social. We learn through embodied AI and how people interact with it, how social interaction is actually working. So sociology told us for a long time that social interaction is only possible by definition between humans. And with embodied AI that is trying to not necessarily mirror humans, but mirror social interactions, we can systematically study and explore that. And what I'm wondering is, Sherry Turkle posed this assumption about the relational artifact quite some time ago, arguing that social robotics is so critical because we intentionally design social cues into embodied AI in order to create these artificial relations, and this is misleading. However, when I have a look at everything, I mean, we are not there yet, right? With developing robots that mirror social interaction that far. But if I have a look where we are with companion robots like Anki Vector, for instance, I don't see anything close to this relational artifact hypothesis or assumption. So it's interesting and will continue to be interesting to study these effects.
But so you would argue that so embodiment is, like, everyone would agree that embodiment is critical to study human interactions with AI. But it's quite hard achieving a fully embodied agent. So maybe it can be, it's embodied, but then it has to have all these social signals that are perceived as such by the human user. And I think, so I'm curious to hear your opinions on, like, another aspect related to embodied agents. And some of you already hinted at that, is autonomy. So it should be an autonomous embodied agent. So is this critical for human interactions with AI? Can it be semi-autonomous? Or Elizabeth?
I would not say it should be always autonomous. So, for example, we used virtual agents for social coaching, and then actually we need to define a script for the agent in order to make sure that the educational or learning goals are achieved. And also, if you hire a human actor, the actor would also be requested actually to follow a script. The actor cannot just, engage in any social interaction without presenting any challenges to the other person. So I would not say for all applications we need autonomy. For some of them, yes, but not for all of them.
Okay. Tony, would you agree with that?
So I do agree. There's a time and place, of course, for Wizard of Oz, sometimes to just substitute for malfunctioning or not yet mature AI. And sometimes because you want to use the robot or the embodied AI as a kind of a conduit to someone else. So, for example, children will, in some occasions, be more prepared to share something with the robot than with a human therapist. And that robot doesn't have to be autonomous. It could be teleoperated by the human therapist without the child knowing. So there's, there are occasions where you can use teleoperation. And we've seen lots of examples of this artificial intelligence where even, pizza delivery robots are controlled from a low-wage country. But I think the ultimate goal is, if we're going to scale this up, we can't teleoperate. The dream really is autonomy, and that is why I think we're kind of not investing enough in studying that autonomy. And it was on the slides of Zerin as well. Building autonomous social interaction requires the entire AI department. And I think just because of that, because of the sheer scale of this challenge, not only is it hard, but it's also it requires bringing together so many different people, and that's also one of the reasons why we're not there yet.
Mary Ellen, you want to add something as well?
Yeah, I guess it's also just unsatisfying with my engineer hat on to not build something. I mean, it's kind of the case right now that probably something that's teleoperated will probably behave better and more like what people expect, because people expect these things based on popular culture and videos that involve a person pretending to be a robot or an animated character, motion captured by an actor. So on the one hand, you can you can understand more about human communication and the sort of thing Astrid was saying in terms of by making something that appears to be artificial and seeing how do people respond to it. That's an interesting scientific question. It's just not one that that inspires me very much. I'm much more excited about trying to actually build something and put it out in the world and let it do its thing. And even if it's a little bit flaky, that's for me much more satisfying. As I'm not officially an engineer, but in the sense of my degree is not engineering, but I think in my heart I'm an engineer, and that's really what I want to do, is build stuff and put it out in the world. And also in terms of the autonomous thing, so this project I'm talking about, that I talked about right now, that's ongoing with Canadian colleagues with the emergency department, they have actually done a study, a clinical trial with a teleoperated robot in an emergency department. And talking to them, they were just, they hated the fact it was just so flaky, and there was a person with an iPad the whole time, and it just couldn't respond the way they wanted it to. So it's kind of taking that use case, which seems to be a legit use case, and they've done kind of the teleoperated version, and try to add even as much autonomy as we can. I think that'll just make it, as I think Tony said, more scalable and more flexible, and it'll just kind of take that thing which they've done in a teleoperated way and make it better, even if it's just a now robot that only does like 3 different things. It'll at least decide for itself which is those three things it does in an intelligent way. But really, for me, I just want to build stuff. I don't want it to be a puppet, and it's just personally more satisfying for me.
So the ultimate goal of like building a fully autonomous, or at least like a scalable robot that can differ between like forms of autonomy, then depending on the use case.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think, Astrid, like one thing you said before is that you could use like embodied agents to understand human psychology. So in that way, like not a fully autonomous robot would make sense, right? Similar to what Elizabeth was just saying, like using an actor with these scripts. So is that like how you would use it in your studies as well?
That depends always on the question you want to answer with that embodied AI. So for standardized lab experiments where you kind of, you try out standardized stuff like when the robot waves or shakes the hand, which greeting behavior is considered more natural or stuff like that. You don't need much autonomy for these type of studies. You don't need much intelligence. You just need a good wizard and a good script and a good experimental design. What I'm interested in, more similar like Martje, are these long-term effects. So if people are living together, interacting with these systems over a longer period of time, what is happening? How is it the technology actually used? It doesn't necessarily have to be an intelligent technology that these questions are of interest, but they are more interesting to me when there is some time of intelligence, flexibility of the system. What I was wondering, and I wanted to pose that question to Elizabeth, is autonomy is one thing, and I would say we don't necessarily need full autonomy, not for all types of studies and also applications. But what about agency? What is your opinion? How relevant is agency and lifelikeness for successful embodied AI?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and of course you always have to find the right balance. So if the agent gets boring over time or even unnatural because it's just following a script, and of course there are also unintended or unexpected or not anticipated behaviors from the human user or maybe also from the environment. And then the agent, of course, needs to know how to behave. But on the other hand, the question is, of course, do we really want fully automated or fully autonomous agents without defining any corridor within which the agent should behave? Because if I'm an engineer, and I definitely find the autonomous agents much more interesting, and that's also what I really would like to work on. But on the other hand, it's also difficult for humans or for people who develop robots to predict what will actually happen. And so if you say, for example, okay, somebody should have no more pain, and the robot might come up with a solution which actually even harms the person, because we did not anticipate a particular thing which could have happened, or somebody feels disturbed by family members causing a lot of noise. So the robot might do a very harmful thing just actually to reduce the noise. And also the question is, when I have a companion in my home who behaves in a very natural manner, do I want the agent to tell me, okay, I find the job boring, or today I'm in a bad mood because you give me all these stupid tasks? Yeah, that's the question. Really, is what we want, and what are the limits, and fully autonomy could be even a little bit dangerous in the end.
So it should be always restricted from the perspective of the human user and builder, of the developer, of course. So Astrid, you had your hand raised to respond. So you're still muted.
I just want to quickly react to that one, because that was one of the findings from the long-term study with the vector robot that I considered insightful. So people had the robot at home, and their only task was to live with it and explore it, use it, not use, whatever they want to do. And the agency out of the box, the lifelikeness of the vector robot is really brilliantly done. So it's really catchy, this hedonic quality of the robot. People were fascinated and liked it for 2 to 4 weeks. So very similar, like the findings that Martja had in her long-term studies. However, one aspect of the agency was also that vector randomly explores the apartment, leaves the docking station, goes back to the docking station, stuff like that. Also during the night. And people didn't want that at all. And it was a main reason why they turned it off and started to use it as a switch on, switch off device, because it makes noise in the night, which is so obvious somehow. And also creepy somehow, right? During the night, when once of a sudden this tiny thing moves out of its docking station. But that was an interesting insight with respect to agency.
Yeah, it is also like a great argument for like these really long-term like studies on long-term interactions with robots, right? Because then you discover that something different happens at night than during the day, because during the day it's very relevant behavior that might improve the engagement with the robot, but outside of those times it doesn't. So I want to move on to some of the like pressing issues, or at least what I think are pressing issues in embodied AI, that are related to replicability of the research, culture and diversity. So how do you envision future research on these matters? So I know, for example, Tony, you published on these issues that are related to reproducibility of the research.
Try and say that 2 times. No.
Sorry?
Try and say that 2 times.
Yeah, I know. So like any views on how we can improve the robustness of the science of human-robot interaction or embodied AI?
There's a few ideas that we have. So a personal story. So we a few years back, there was a paper coming from a reputable lab in the States, and I thought like, oh, that's a cool result. And I had a master's student, didn't really know what he had to do, so I thought like let him replicate this paper just to kind of, as a little exercise. And he did a really good job, spent weeks implementing the robot, recruiting people, and we didn't find a thing. And I really was convinced that this was going to work. This was like a first step in a line of studies that we wanted to do, and it just didn't work. And then I realized that things are not always, replicable. And it's like, honestly, the whole replication crisis in psychology hadn't taken off yet. So it was weird for us. And but what it boiled down to in the end, after a bit of sifting through the data, was that the students, so they used a convenience sample in the States, and they had very clever students. Yeah, they used computer science students from that particular Ivy League university. And the students that we had were, let's be honest, not as talented as those students. And it made a difference in how they responded to the robots, possibly also cultural differences. It was in the States. The first study was in the States. The second one was in the UK. But so the populations were just different enough to not give us the results that we expected to see. And it made me realize that it's actually really difficult to replicate HRI research for many different reasons. Now, there's a number of things that you can do to kind of try and prevent that. So first of all, you could replicate as closely as possible, go to the same lab, use a very similar population, et cetera, difficult to do, of course. Be aware of that replication isn't always what you want. Yeah, it was good to show that this didn't work on this particular occasion because we learned from it. We learned that the effect was probably due to the population that they used. And now we knew that, the population is very important. Of course, then getting that published is really, really hard. But we found it time and time again, which we ran so many user studies that we really had these expectations like this is what we're going to see, and it didn't. We didn't get those results that we hypothesized, and it just made us more and more aware of how we run experiments. Things like, for example, take enough participants in your study. Power is incredibly important. So I didn't realize, hey, I'm not a psychologist, so what do I know about power? But then I realized that there's, this calculation that you can do to figure out how many participants you're going to need to make sure that you don't get a result that is just gotten by accident and that has a high chance of not being replicable. Sorry, long sentences. And then we looked at, for example, all the publications in the major conferences in our field, and almost no one, I can say no one, does power analyses, or certainly does not report power analyses. And that's such an oversight. Yeah. So we should do better in our community, and it. Learn from the mistakes that we've made, learn from mistakes that people in other fields have made. And I think also just accept that not being able to replicate a study is kind of part and parcel of what we do. It's going to happen. Disappointment is kind of, fairly normal, and this normality should be reflected in how we kind of talk about our research as well, how we communicate our research. It doesn't always work, and perhaps the occasions on where it doesn't work are more interesting than the occasions where it does work.
No, I agree that those are very valid points. But I guess for Mary Ellen, you wanted to respond, but I think these are hard questions for like studies in the wild as well, right? So. Yeah. Having a robot in the supermarket is something completely different than a robot in the lab.
Yes, yeah. So I could talk about certainly the logistical challenges we had, and the reason we haven't managed to publish anything out of our 14-week long-term deployment, which I'm incredibly proud of, but we haven't actually. It's hard to figure out what to do with that because it's a whole lot of in the wild data from anyway. And then the project finished just when COVID started and everyone did something else anyway. So there's also that. But what I was going to say before was actually, I give a guest lecture. There's a course in Glasgow on social robotics, which is taught to psychology. Ruth knows about this course. There's a course which is taught to final year undergraduates and master's students on social robotics. It's kind of a 5-week sort of seminar course. And I give a talk 1 week in that on sort of HRI evaluation. And I feel like I have to spend the entire talk apologizing for my field, because there's all these psychologists who know how research should be done and who know how measurement should be done and what a good measurement method is. And I'm like, well, eventually now we're kind of trying to come up with something that's kind of, before everyone made up their own measure of success. And now at least we're kind of trying as a field to come up with some things that kind of agree with each other a little bit. But I feel like I spend the whole talk apologizing to these psychologists for the state of the field and sort of saying we're trying to get better, but this is what we do right now in HRI for doing user studies. So it's kind of funny, that talk always.
And it only gets better, right, from here onwards.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people are trying to do sort of meta-analyses and have validated instruments for evaluating things and design studies in a better way, and it's coming. But if I talk about sort of the history of HRI evaluation, it's kind of everyone, even there was this validated study from over 10 years ago, but everyone sort of took it and used it in invalid ways. So you can't even compare Godspeed studies to Godspeed studies because everyone did something weird. So it's yeah, just constant apologies basically during the course of me giving this talk.
Yeah, it's a great course, by the way. So Elizabeth, you want to respond to this as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's indeed hard to control the many factors you in principle have to take into account. So we run studies where we gave the robot simply a different name, a female versus a male name, and also gave it a female versus a male voice. And because we humans actually suffer from bias, and it's a bias also occurs when people interact with robots. And, they did not even evaluate the robot differently. They also behave differently. It took them longer, depending on whether the robot had a female or a male voice and name. And the same also, not the same, but similar differences also occurred if we gave it a foreign name and told the people, okay, this robot was developed by your German colleagues versus colleagues from another country, and it influenced whether people were willing to collaborate with the robot or not. And of course, these are factors that are somehow hard to predict, because usually we don't think about whether we give the robot a male or a female name. And it's because of human bias, which also plays an important role. And of course, it depends also on the culture. So if a robot reflects maybe the German culture, some people simply would not like it, or may even make jokes about it because they recognize maybe the prototypical German and find it funny. And all these factors are, of course, very difficult to control and to predict.
No, yeah, indeed. So I was wondering.
Sorry, can I just say quickly in response to that? I mean, obviously, psychologists and sociologists and stuff solve these problems when they study humans talking to humans, or at least they address similar problems. And sometimes it feels like sort of where engineers come in, it's like, we're going to solve this problem, and it's like you talk to if you're thinking about something that's kind of based on human interaction, it's worth talking to the experts and studying human interaction. And obviously it's not the same questions, but I found it's always been very enlightening for me to talk to sort of, in my work, especially sort of sociolinguists, in terms of how do people, and psycholinguists, how do people actually talk about things when they talk to people, and try to model things that way. It doesn't solve all the problems, but at least it can help. Sorry, quick little interjection there.
Thanks. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. So Astrid, you wanted to respond to this as well, because you have a project on gender-sensitive engagement with robots, right? So how do you deal with this in your research then?
Yeah, exactly. That was the second little robot that I showed in my slides, this QB01. And the idea of the project was, or the goal was, to enable gender-sensitive interaction. It would take me too long to explain that in detail, but the main thing was we really want to avoid reinforcing gender stereotypes. This is what we hear over and over again, also in relation to embodied AI, right? And we know from research, as Elizabeth told us about, that there are critical aspects, right? We know that the voice makes a difference. We saw so many studies in the HCI field on voice assistants and feminine submissive traits and all these things. However, when you try to really create gender-sensitive interaction, and we did expert interviews and we asked the target group, and then you end up in, and how do I integrate that the hell into my interaction design? Then it gets tricky. And it also gets tricky that we always consider all kinds of stereotypes as something negative, and that a sociologist training talks kind of, because in sociology you would talk about an ideal type, and humans are doing that all the time. We need to reduce complexity, and in order to reduce complexity we use ideal types, and we categorize situations, people, everything. So as Elizabeth said, there is always bias, and I think what we know too little yet is what do we actually want to avoid and what do we have to avoid, because it's really critical. For instance, if we reinforce unequal labor distribution because care robots are female and stuff like that. But what could we use productively out of these stereotypes, ideal types people are using? So that was for me the biggest challenge in the interaction design. And we even had the feedback from, so the robot was intended for older adults. And one of the care personnel people even told us many of the older adults want to have their stereotypes because they are used to them, and this is how everyday life should work for them. And if you get rid of all of this and allow too much personalization, flexibility in the interaction, it won't be successful. So that gave me a lot of thinking. And with the whole replication crisis, I just wanted to add to what Mary said. Psychology has its very own replication crisis. So it's not just that HRI has to apologize all the time. Psychology people have their very own crisis, right? But what I was trained as a sociologist from the beginning was sociology doesn't work with experiments. Experiments are only for psychologists and social psychologists, because in sociology you just believe in exploratory empirical research, because you are aware that social interaction is so much context dependent that you cannot replicate it. And I think that's a bit of the problem we're stuck in the HRI field, because 20 years ago we thought it's a brilliant idea, there must be some general, let's say, cues and interaction ways between humans that we can transfer to HRI. And if we succeed in transferring them well enough, we will have super intuitive, perfect HRI. And I'm thinking that this human-human translated approach, I'm doubting more and more that this is a road to success. There is little ground to truth in social interaction that we can directly transfer to machines. That sounds frustrating. Could someone say something positive?
Well, I will. So I feel a little bit bad because Zarin will take over now. So now we establish like all the challenges and the problems in the field. And so how can we actually go from here to reconstruct the field might even be another question. But yeah, Zarin, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I was just following very interesting questions and responses. So they're seeing these different aspects. I want to a little bit shift towards this autonomy discussion and to work towards more technical challenges to achieve this long-term robust human, virtual human or robot interaction. So of course there are many different challenges, right? Like in the natural language understanding, speech, computer vision, generating movements. Yeah, just name it, multimodal understanding sentences or high-level cognitive functions, emotions, memory. And lately, of course, we are discussing like evolving algorithms, algorithms that can adapt to new situations versus pre-trained. machine learning, deep learning algorithms, like this bottom-up approach and like high-level symbolic approach. So how do you see all these big challenges, and how to find and how to navigate in this, and what are the most challenging or most important things that the community would be first working on, and where are we at the moment, and where we like to go as a next step? Big question.
Yeah, maybe I can start, and others can extend it. The biggest challenge is to bring it all together. So people basically focus on their own field. So in one project, we collaborate with a company. They are able to create really impressive animations. The animations look very real. So it's I was just impressed when I saw it. I have never seen such a thing before. And we try to combine it with technology to recognize human behaviors, because we respond to each other in real time. We nod, we smile, we follow other people with our gaze. And bringing it together made the whole thing a little bit, I would say, even scary, because, there were some tiny inconsistencies, and then, this spoiled the whole illusion. And the same with different modalities. Okay, you have a very expressive face, visual appearance, but the voice does not match properly the face. And if the voice matches the face, it's not able to portray emotions actually in the voice and in the face. And so I would say bringing it together to come up with a compelling personality is a big challenge. And the other challenge, so Barbara Gross once said, okay, we need a new Turing award, a Turing test. And the Turing test is that an agent collaborates with humans in a team over a longer period of time and under unpredicted situations. And that is, a kind of, even more challenging than the original Turing test.
Okay, any other comments on that?
I think it's going to be hard enough just solving the first Turing test. 70 years later,
That's true.
we're still nowhere. But it's a very, very big question, so I don't have any specific answer. I agree with what Elizabeth says. So we humans are incredibly sensitive to the smallest thing that is off in an interaction. And so if we recreate artificial interaction, or if we create artificial interaction, we notice it immediately if something is wrong. Yeah, if the emotion in the voice doesn't match what the face is expressing, if there's a tiny bit of a delay somewhere, if the response isn't just fast enough, we realize. Is that a huge problem? No, it isn't. It's only a problem if we're trying to recreate, replicants of people, if we're trying to build androids. And most often we don't do that. What I do find interesting is that a lot of what we do in building these technologies is kind of pushed by developments in other fields of or other areas of technology. So, for example, if we suddenly have access to a new type of sensor, so one that, for example, RGBD cameras is a nice one, then suddenly we latch onto that and we try to build all kinds of new interactions that that benefit from that, from the knowledge that, or from this information on where things are in 3 dimensions, or what people are particularly, are doing with their arms. And the recent fad, of course, is anything to do with machine learning and data-driven approaches, which I'm very excited about. But it's going to be interesting to see where this leads us and also what the limitations are. And I think one of the limitations is that in most of these approaches, all the deep learning approaches, we just stay within one single modality. We translate text into other text. We take vision and classify things. So we kind of do things in one modality. While we people are multimodal, we do so many, we just use, I can't even count, a dozen different modalities, and they all sync together. And we're nowhere there. We can't seem to manage this with data-driven approaches. So I wonder how we can kind of perhaps as a field expose that and expose the need for multimodality in data-driven approaches, and perhaps offer a few ways forward, or express what is important and what what perhaps isn't that important, where we should put our focus on. The other thing, of course, that fascinates me is that machine learning nowadays is still so behind biological learning. What is going on in the animal brain when we're adapting, when we're learning, and why can't we replicate this in artificial systems? And the moment we crack that one, I think this is going to boost, embodied AI beyond anything beyond our wildest dreams. So it's just, the future is out there.
Right, it's what you said, like these other disciplines driving this field is very interesting. I think like something new popping up there, then you basically try to bring this new algorithm or technique or device which is driving very much our core research as well. And I think it's very much something to think about carefully as well, what is really important in the field. I think Astrid had something to say.
Yeah, and it fits nicely to what Tony just said, because I also think that the next really crucial step to get people using robots longer is focusing more again on learning and teaching. So agents learning from the interaction and giving naive users better ways of training the robot to do something useful for it. So I think teaching and training are key for the future, for the next developments.
Yeah, and Mary Ellen, you also have something to add?
Yeah. Well, I was AFK giving my son a snack during the question, but I could still respond to what I heard of whatever the question is. I still have things I could say based on what I heard people talking about. So this may or may not be directly relevant to what we're saying here, but I know I used to, when I was working even when I was working with just language, I used to try to use words like natural in terms of how people should communicate with something. And I think I'm trying to come up with a better word than natural. We're using the mechanisms we use to communicate with humans, to communicate with these embodied things. But that doesn't mean it's a pretend human. It just means that it can understand our signals, and it sends signals that are appropriate for whatever form factor it happens to have. Like there's a project that I keep wanting to get a student on that nobody keeps going for, which is about trying to understand people's expectations because my experience of a lot of the time of putting robots in places is people have super high expectations based on pop culture, and then they talk to the robot and it doesn't quite understand them and everything comes crashing down. And if you could somehow manage the situation, you're trying to leverage people's ability and people's incredible adaptability about talking to small children, talking to dogs, whatever. It doesn't need to behave like a human, and it certainly doesn't need to look like a human, like Sophia or whatever, but it needs to understand human behavior and produce signals that match what you think it should match, so that you can build up a coherent model of this thing and use your social communication mechanisms that you've learned to talk to this thing as what it actually is, not as a pretend human or something that you think is going to be amazing and that it doesn't understand you, so it's a really stupid human. I don't know what that is, but that seems to be the sort of a thing that would help. And using the word natural is the wrong one for these sort of communication things. It's more just leveraging people's natural abilities to implement communication with this artificial entity. And I have no idea whether that matches the question, but it's something that I wanted to say anyway.
It very well matches, yes. Maybe a follow-up question to that, because we know it's challenging to bring all these things together, and it needs interdisciplinary teams like we are doing today, bringing people together to talk, to take a step to understand each other better. So I'm curious, what is your approach to these interdisciplinary collaborations within different disciplines, but also it could be with industry, because different people, different stakeholders, they have different motivations, and it's also challenging on top of these algorithmic challenges, etc. How do we manage this, and what are your experiences about that? Yes, Astrid.
Very honest truth, when you start collaborating with someone from a different discipline where you haven't been in collaboration before, give yourself at least 5 years for a development project, and not the typical 3 years we get. You need 1 year of grounding to know what everyone in the team is really working on and what the common vision is. And this year is not, you cannot start developing whatever right away. However, when you've worked with people before and know their work, then 3 years can be sufficient. But I realize more and more you need at least 1 year of good grounding among the different disciplines. I realize in bigger EU projects how relevant it is to support students and advise them that every contribution is of value and that everyone is doing science. Because originally I always had when I started my studies, PhD studies, I was afraid that I'm not taken seriously by all these roboticists and super smart people as I'm just a sociologist. And then later it turns out that all these roboticist PhD students were super afraid that I have the opinion that they are not really doing science, but they are just making systems run, and I'm the only one who is doing real science. So I realize it's a lot about also supporting each other in a project team, that every contribution has its value and is needed to solve a problem. And to accept that all of these problems we try to solve in transdisciplinary projects are kind of wicked problems. So meaning when you solve one little piece, you create a new problem with it, and that's okay. There is no final answer normally. Yeah. So that's my take on interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work.
Very nicely put. Yeah, I fully agree. Elizabeth, you also had something to say.
Yeah, I can only confirm that. We had a big network on emotion research called Humane. And actually, when we started with the project, I thought I have worked with psychologists and I know how to do it. But it took 4 years to be able to get interesting work together. It was very inspiring. And then I thought, okay, now I have worked for a long time with psychologists. I know what it is to do interdisciplinary work. And then I came across another discipline, and it started actually again from the beginning. But nevertheless, I find that's what I like about computer science. So basically, you can collaborate with any discipline, and you also get a lot of benefit from other disciplines. So sometimes you try to solve a problem, you look at the research done in your area, and you don't find a solution. And several times during my research, actually, I found a part of the solution, or the biggest part of the solution, in other disciplines. And I think it's really worth to really engage with other disciplines. I find it very inspiring, very fruitful, and one should not give up too early, because then you miss a lot.
Yeah. And Tony, you also had something to say.
Yes, I forgot what I wanted to say, but But it's so, you know, you're absolutely right. It takes many years, you know, if you do cross-disciplinary work, and the main reason is because the others don't listen. No, it's not true. It's just, you know, the most rewarding and impactful work I've done was, you know, crossing disciplinary boundaries, and also, you know, that work was also the most fun to do. But you're right. It takes a long time, and for me, I found quite often one of the most important things was that I needed to set the right expectations, because people who don't work in robotics, they often believe that robots can do things that they can't. I still vividly remember years ago, I went to, you know, in the context of a European project, we went to Milan, and we worked together with the hospital there, and we came in, and the head of the pediatric department, you know, had a meeting with us. So, and he came in, very eminent doctor, and you know, came in his lab coat. The roboticists. This is what I want, he said. Your robot is going to go downstairs. Yeah, we were like 6 floors up. Your robot is going to go downstairs, wait at the entrance for the child to arrive, and then take the hand of the child and lead the child back up to the 6th floor, and then give a tour of the department. Understood? Thank you. And he left. and it took us another 2 years for him to realize that we couldn't do that. And actually, perhaps I'm just saying, because perhaps I wasn't really joking when I said the others don't listen. There is something that we should do, is others should listen to us, but also we should listen to others. And sometimes we don't make that time available to actually listen to what people can do, but also, very important, to what people can't do. And if only we would make time for that, our lives would be a bit easier.
Yeah, I fully agree that it takes time to you know, make these communications. But on the other hand, once it is done, like really seriously and genuinely, it goes nicely, I think. So that is the rewarding part of it. Mary Ellen, you also.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, I've worked with various mostly linguists and more recently sort of end user type people, and the main furthest from my discipline that I've worked with. I can say with my current hospital project, it's nicely grounded by the fact that they worked with a teleoperated now in a previous project. So anything we can do is going to, you know, our medical collaborators on my medical robotics project, if we make it do anything, it'll blow their mind, because they've already worked with a fully teleoperated now, and so they have very low expectations. So it's more about letting them sort of think about the space of what this thing could do, let them dream about what it might be able to do. But yeah, with the shopping mall, we talked to the shopping mall owners, and they said things like, Pepper can be a security guard. No, Pepper cannot be a security guard. Pepper can carry people's shopping. No, Pepper cannot carry people's shopping. So people have these strange expectations. But yeah, it can be rewarding, but it just can be incredibly frustrating. And especially, you know, the biggest frustrations I've had are actually with industrial partners on projects who just have completely different priorities. So different academics have different research goals, but they're still at some level trying to do research. People from industry just have completely different priorities, and maybe the corporate priorities change underneath. They, you know, people you work with want to work with you in this project, and then the overlords decide actually no. And then I wasn't on a project like this, but I know a project where they had a large company who just basically said, nope, we're strategically dropping that whole branch after they were involved in a project, and so they had to sort of completely refactor the project. So that's a different sort of challenge, especially in this space where you're doing robotics, you're doing hardware things, you're probably going to work at some level with, you're trying to deploy in real spaces, you're going to talk with stakeholders who are not even academics, and that's just an extra level of challenge.
That is such a problem, isn't it? Sorry, ranting now.
I could rant for a very long time about this, but I shouldn't.
It's because we're forced by, you know, governments and funding agencies to collaborate with industry, but industry has, you know, different timelines, different reward systems. You know, we're paid in publications, they are paid in sales, and so it's such different worlds that the only people in industry worth working with are the people who used to be ex-academics, because they understand what we do. But if you run into, you know, and it always happens, you know, company that tags along on a proposal because you just need them, otherwise you don't get the money. They're very difficult to work with. The best collaboration is if they go their own way and we go their own way, I've found, and we come to bed together to just write the final report. It's kind of an ugly truth that not many people want to see, and even funding agencies know that. They know that what we do in academia is slow and doesn't always meet the requirements of industry. But it's just accepted. It's accepted as kind of an underhand way of subsidizing, national or European industry, and that's fine. Yeah, if we all accept that, that's how this interaction, this kind of collaboration works. But it's not ideal. There's so many ways to improve that. But hey, sorry, I'm going to stop ranting.
No, thanks a lot. So I think due to time, I will give the driving seat back to Ruud to have the final part. So yeah, let's go ahead, Ruud.
All right, thank you. Yes, I will just ask like one final question before we go on to the more informal part. So the question really is like how, like it nicely follows from this question on collaboration and interdisciplinary projects, but how do we prepare and train the next generation of researchers in embodied AI? So Mary Ellen, you teach in a course that both targets psychology students and potentially other backgrounds as well. So do you have any like opinion on how to train the next generation of researchers in embodied AI?
Not that you're putting me in the spot. Not a lot, but no. But I mean, I guess it's more like just understand where what you want is people who both understand the limitations and capabilities of the technology, but also who understand the because you don't want people who just understand human behavior and you're like just like Tony and like Tony is about examples, like make the robot do this. So you want people who have a knowledge of the technology and what it can do and what it might be able to do in the near future and what it can't do, but also who have sort of the vision to sort of understand and how can we use this technology to build something to talk to people. And I'm not sure. So interdisciplinary type training thing, like we have the Center for Doctoral Training in Glasgow, which is basically about socially interactive AI, where students they do 1 year of taught courses, which is half in sort of from psychology and half from computer science, and then they do a project kind of in that space. So I think interdisciplinary training, things like that, are probably the way forward to produce people with the knowledge about. I'm not going to say there's probably more than two, but kind of both sides, and sort of broadly speaking of this thing, the technology and the sort of human factor side. So that's,
so join.
Well, if anyone's looking for a PhD project next year, the next cohort in Glasgow will open sort of early next year, and it's really exciting place to do a PhD. So watch out for Social Interactive CDT, Center for Doctoral Training in Glasgow.
All right, yeah, students take note. So like the both sides or multiple sides in one program. So Astrid, you wanted to add something to this as well?
Yeah, most of my teaching is also for people with various backgrounds. So I have computer scientists, with psychologists, with sociologists, with cognitive scientists in one class to teach on HCI and HRI topics. And what I see as my, let's say, core responsibility is that many of them will leave university and go to industry after their masters. So what I try to achieve is to make them, let's say, critical thinkers, because that's most likely the last step in their education where they will get in touch with these topics. So I'm showing them newest policies and regulations on ethics and AI, for instance. I'm doing a lot of project-based work, not necessarily that they are in interdisciplinary teams for their projects. Everyone can have his or her own project, but that they really not just make it run, but have to do some user analysis as well. So showing them one and the same topic from what I call different lenses. So you can have a human-centered lens, you can have a robot-centered lens, you can have a cognition-centered lens, but always work on the same research problem. For instance, as topic of the course, creating an embodied AI that helps the elderly. And many times I get feedback like, yeah, but you can only do that with master students or with PhD students. Why the hell? Also bachelor students are smart. You can also do project work with bachelor students, also in a huge class if you prepare it the right way. So I think it's a lot of showing them that one and the same problem can be addressed from various perspectives or through different lenses.
Yeah, so different perspectives, same question. Tony, Elizabeth. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, actually, I found it always very challenging at the university to prepare students for interdisciplinary work. So, for example, we had some collaboration with people from the media communication, and they had some issues with computer science students because they thought, okay, this is a little bit soft and I don't have to work. And so there were a lot of misconceptions, and the only possibility I really see are the national and international projects, because usually in these projects several disciplines are involved. And if you actually have students participate in research, they a good possibility is actually to have them contribute to such a project, and then they get actually in touch with other disciplines, and they also like it a lot, because for them it's a new experience to work with people from other countries, and that's very rewarding for them as such. And they find that they are more open in such projects also for interdisciplinary work. But I guess in general, maybe the universities should really offer the space for interdisciplinary student teams, because I always have the feeling I have to invent something to make it happen. And so recently, my colleague from the University of Munich, Albrecht Schmidt, gave a course on ethics for computer scientists. So we had an interdisciplinary workshop, not for computer scientists. And actually, I studied the CHI proceedings to find out about the challenges to teach ethics to computer scientists. And so what I could take away from the papers that have been published was actually to offer some creative space, so some space where students can be creative in their ideas, and also as a teacher come up with creative ideas to teach or convey particular topics.
So you would say that they're both like top down and bottom up, like ways to train the next generation. So you can have like student driven projects, but also there could be some like courses or like time. But this is another issue, right? Like most of the times these interdisciplinary projects would probably take more time than monodisciplinary, because it involves like communication with other disciplines, like finding like a common language. So that's another issue, I think, that is a thing for students.
Yeah, if the students get a concrete goal, it actually could actually work faster, because then they are very engaged and motivated, and they appreciate to get some help from the other discipline.
Yeah. Astrid, you wanted to respond to this as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say maybe these structural problems that you mentioned are a Germany-Austrian problem, because I have even situations where computer scientists get more or less credits in my course than a student from a different discipline, depending on the curriculum. And that makes it extremely hard to teach the course, to say it politely.
All right,
I completely agree.
So this is very Austrian and German, I would say.
So Tony, are there any Belgian or British issues, or like final things you want to say about training then to the next generation before we wrap up?
I find interdisciplinarity is the hard thing. Quite often you're stuck in a faculty, engineering, science, computer science, whatever, and trying to organize opportunities for students to get access to knowledge from different disciplines in there is often frowned upon by colleagues. Like, what do you want to teach this thing for? And sometimes at the master's level, it gets easier. PhD, of course, that's really easy. For us, we try to kind of lure students in with master projects and then give them something that opens their eyes. And it's very much a personal approach where we kind of pick and mix from things they need to know that we then offer on a kind of almost needs to be basis. So yeah, no, actually, to be fair, we're just improvising, but I think it works.
All right, thank you. So I think like I guess we can all conclude that like working on these interdisciplinary projects is very exciting, while challenging, but still very exciting. And that's why we're still here, right? So I'm very excited to talk to other disciplines. So I think we can wrap up the final, like the official, not the final part, the official part with the recording. So we can stop recording. And then we can have some discussions or like some questions from the audience. I think the chat is not working yet, or still not working.